Imagine what it would be like to be born without any freedom, while others take their freedom for granted each and every day. Much great literature exposes the idea of freedom and how our sense of freedom manifests in different ways. Freedom is the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. Freedom affects many people in several different ways. For example, a kid could be grounded and he is confined to very little space in his house. Or a sadly woman could be trapped in an abusive relationship and their freedom is restricted due to their partner. Freedom is explored in depth throughout the poem Daddy by Sylvia Plath, which is a poem that forces its readers to think deeply about freedom. I'm a man born in Canada and I have all the freedom I could ever want. Others may not have that freedom and I sometimes take that for granted. The poem I have chose to discuss this topic is Daddy by Sylvia Plath. I chose this poem because it discusses the topic of freedom fairly well and I can connect with it because I was born with freedom while others around the world are not and may never have the amount of freedom that I do. I sometimes take what I have for granted while others are fighting just to have a little bit of freedom. Sylvia Plath, a famous American poet who was known for exploring darker concepts due to her depression. Plath based his poem around her father who passed away when she was 8 years old. His death affected her deeply as he was a very strict man, and her life drastically changed after his death as he influenced a lot of her poems. Daddy was written on October 12, 1962, shortly before Plath's suicide. This poem was very controversial during its publication as it utilizes images from the Holocaust as metaphors. In this poem, Plath delves into a relationship with her father and how this patriarchal figure made her feel confinement and lack of freedom. This poem is a free-verse quatrain with no set rhyme scheme and contains a total of 16 quatrains. A quatrain is a stanza with 5 lines. Sound is very important in this poem as the poem has some end and internal sounds in it along with iambic pentameter. One sound that is used throughout is the ooh sound, which gives the poem a sense of rhyming without using a specific rhyming scheme. One example of this is directly at the beginning of the poem when Plath writes, you do not do anymore, black shoe." This makes these lines sound rhythmic, and it also made me think of the elimination game that kids play when they decide who is it for tag that goes, black shoe, change your black shoe." This poem uses a lot of literary devices all over the place which helps add to the theme of the poem. The most obvious device used is the Holocaust imagery that makes the father appear as an evil man. An example of this is when Plath says, an engine, chuffing me off like a Jew, and not God, but a swastika, so black no sky could squeak through. Every woman adores a fascist. The boot in the face. The brute. Brute heart of a brute like you. Not only does the later line evoke strong imagery, it also makes use of hyperbole to exaggerate the image of a swastika blocking out the sun. The lines immediately put horrible images of the Holocaust into the reader's minds and make the readers associate it with the father. This poem is a feminist poem because Plath wrote this about her feelings towards her father, who has passed away, and how he had a major effect on her life. Evidence that supports this is the lines, I have always been scared of you, with your Luftwaffe, your gobbledygoo, and your neat mustache and your Aryan eye, bright blue, Panzerman, oh you. These lines describe that Plath was always afraid of her father and that she is portrayed in this poem as helpless and without freedom. Plath implies that her fear of her father is because he is a Panzerman, which is a German attacking vehicle, and that she can do nothing about it because she is a female. Another way she talks about her father's actions is when she says, the boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you. These lines are describing how she sees her father and how her father is a brute with a brute heart. The definition of brute is a savagely violent person or animal. Her father has clearly done some horrible things to her and to others for her to see that her father is a savage, because a savage is someone who is a brutal or vicious person. This is a feminist poem because she was writing about how her father treated her and the feelings she had toward him after what he had done. This poem has some similarities to the short story The Dragon by Catherine Gouvier by the same themes that are present. In The Dragon, the character Pamela suffers from domestic abuse from her husband Kirk all the time. Pamela says, "It's not fair," said Pamela. She kept repeating that she never met the man. Perhaps she did something, said something to him. The violence seemed to have nothing to do with her. After it happened, she spent weeks powdering herself to cover the bruises and had to revamp her hairstyle because of the bald patches. Although Pamela deals with the abuse from her husband daily, she never leaves him, just as the narrator and Daddy appreciates and loves her father even though she is scared of him. The similarities are the themes of violence because both women were oppressed by men and could do nothing to stop it because the men had thought less of their victims because they were females and thought they could not fight back. In Daddy, the narrator deals with abuse from her father, and although she thinks of him as a brute with a brute heart, she still has love for her father and appreciates him. These stories can also connect to The Wars by Timothy Finley because the main character, Robert Ross, deals with oppression from his fellow soldiers that fought beside him in the war. In The Wars, Robert has been raped by his fellow soldiers. He still appreciates them for having his back and fighting with him in the war. Overall, it is evident that Daddy is an extremely strong piece of literature that can be connected to other pieces of literature due to its feminist standpoint and the overarching theme of freedom from oppression. The literary devices used in the poem Daddy, especially imagery, shed light on how women perceive being oppressed by men. The poem also shares similarities with the novel The Wars and the short story The Dragon because of the way the themes of oppression from the patriarchy appear in all three. Feminism can be connected throughout because in all of these pieces of literature, an important character was faced with oppression and was abused, but still did nothing to get justice for the trauma they had just been put through due to their fear of the oppressor. Daddy is an influential poem as it is significant to the feminist movement and opens up a discussion about oppression. Plath's writing is an example that you should never be afraid to speak up and get justice where justice needs to be served. Sylvia Plath was a great author and very bold to talk about this dark theme of oppression after her father had passed away. Sylvia displays herself as a strong, independent woman and was able to bounce back and write many famous pieces of literature after her father's death.